I'm having major problems, but I think I'm live now. Okay, we're live now. All right, everybody. Pardon me. This has been crazy. Okay, all right, so that's YouTube is over there. Hold on. I'm really sorry, everybody. The method. Yeah. Okay. The method that I use to stream to both YouTube and Facebook every day, it's been working for hundreds and hundreds of episodes. Did not work today. For some reason, it would go to YouTube and not go to Facebook. So I'm definitely verklempt, but seems to be working now. I'm just streaming from my phone. Okay, and on YouTube, I don't even know if it's going or not. Let me see. Hold on one second. I hate to be, which one is it? No views, set reminder. I really don't like troubleshooting while I'm trying to be just sharing with you. I don't know what's going on. I don't know if YouTube is working or not. I think it is. I'm not sure. Looks like it is, but it's not. I don't know what's going on. Oh my gosh. Oh boy. Okay. Looks like it's not going out to YouTube either. All right. Well, hopefully the YouTube people will find us over here on Facebook. I'm very apologetic for all these problems. We didn't change anything. Somehow the system that always worked didn't work today. Okay, so we're not in charge. What can we do? The Holy One runs the world, and for whatever reason, it wasn't meant to work smoothly today. Okay, welcome everybody. Where are you tuning in from? I think that I can monitor comments in the normal way. I can see that we're online on Facebook. The camera, of course, is very different because it's from my phone. There was no music. There was no timer. Oy vey. Okay. Let's light up the darkness. Here's the bell. Okay. All right. All right. What a mess. What a hot mess today. All right. I apologize. But welcome. Welcome Samantha. Welcome Yehudit in South Carolina. Stephen in New Hampshire. Paul in Chicago. Melissa in Great Neck. Tom, Bill, Renee, Ann, Nancy, Patrice, Lucy, Stacy, Stephen, Sean, Crystal. Tom says tech happens. Yes, just so. Hillary, Crystal, Sean, Nancy. Okay, we're welcome. All right, here, we're going. We're making it happen. And God willing, by tomorrow, this drives me bananas because I don't know what went wrong. There's no sure sign of why it didn't connect. The Mevo app that I use for streaming said it's working, but clearly it wasn't working. So anyway, all right. All right, we're holding on Daf Ayin Tes. Where's the actual camera? It's here. Okay, we're holding on Daf Ayin Tes, page 79 in Tractate Pesachim, the fourth volume of the Talmud, the laws of Passover. Today we'll be discussing Mishna number 5. Lately, since Saturday night, we've been introducing just a very quick prayer, focusing on my favorite mitzvah, the Shema. And so at the beginning of our class, we're going to say Shema again. And, I really need it to get focused and recentered and calm. And I'll just say two very quick words about that. So when we say the Shema, the basic declaration of God's unity and as well as his sovereignty in our lives, we close our eyes. And not only do we close our eyes, we cover our eyes. We must close our eyes. I think it's a custom to cover. So many people do it. I think almost everybody does it. It just becomes instinctive. But it's very interesting. If we're closing our eyes, why do we also feel the need to cover our eyes? And I think we do both things, for at least a related reason, which is we need that real focus, that real concentration when we say these words. What I've been adding since Friday night is this sense of waiting so that we hear the primordial Shema. Right? So just ask God to let me hear it before I actually say it and then hear myself say it. These words that pre-existed the universe itself. But when we say it, we do cover our eyes. And that is a very old and ancient and traditional Jewish custom, so much so that during the Holocaust, right? So there were many children that were separated, Jewish children that were separated from their parents because the parents were afraid that they'd all be taken to the concentration camp and killed, and at least perhaps they could save the children. And so there were Jewish children that were handed off often to orphanages, often to Christian orphanages. And thank God, and their lives were saved from the Holocaust. In many cases, their parents were murdered in the concentration camps. After the war, there was an effort to bring these Jewish children either back to their parents or to their closest relatives, so they would be raised in a Jewish home. They were Jewish children. But it became difficult to ascertain, which of the orphans were the Jewish orphans. I mean, often they went into these orphanages when they were 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old. They didn't have that memory that they could tell. They didn't know that was all they could remember. But it turned out, and this story was repeated over and over again, many times, that a rabbi would go into these orphanages and they weren't sure which were the Jewish children. But then the rabbi would say, I'm going to come back tonight at bedtime. And at bedtime, as the children were about to go to sleep, the rabbi would recite Shema. And the children, because we do this with our children from when they're days old, as soon as our children are in the world, when we're, putting them to bed as babies in their crib, we say Shema with them. And so even when they're 1 or 2 years old, they're already seeing that their parents cover their eyes and say Shema. And now these children who had survived the war, some of them as young as 5, 6 years old, who had been taken from their parents when they were 2, 3 years old, when the rabbi would come into the orphanage and say the Shema, and he would cover his eyes and say Shema Yisrael, etc., the children would cover their eyes and say the Shema. It was their earliest, ingrained memory, and it would come right out of them, and often they would cry and call for their mothers and fathers. So that's how fundamental and ingrained this prayer is in the Jewish soul. Now that we're talking about eyes, I'm just going to say one last thought very quickly before we start the material of today's class. This week is Torah portion Mishpatim, the laws. So as God has given the 10 commandments in last week's Torah portion, Yisro, now we continue in the book of Exodus, and God starts to give a lot of laws to the Jewish people. As you know, in the narrative, as it were, the children of Israel were at Sinai. We received the 10 commandments, and then God gave a lot more laws to Moses. One of those laws, very famous, one of the most famous lines in the Bible, and one of the most misunderstood lines. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, etc. It would seem to indicate that if, whether intentional or unintentional, somebody's action resulted in another person being wounded, perhaps permanently, perhaps even in such a horrible way as losing an eye, that the way to make up for it would be that the one who caused somebody else's eye to be put out, that he should have or she should have her eye put out. And our sages teach repeatedly, and from a very early time in our history, that the Torah does not mean an eye for an eye, that if somebody's eye was put out, then the one who caused that, we're going to take his eye out and perhaps start a cycle of feuding and vengeance, etc. But our understanding is that in fact this teaching goes all the way back to Mount Sinai, and it was one of the oral teachings given to Moses at Mount Sinai, that when we say an eye for an eye, and the ayin yachat ayin, the Hebrew of that, doesn't actually say an eye for an eye. It says an eye in the place of an eye, or an eye beneath an eye. And our sages understand that that means we have to look into these words and try to understand what they really mean. And what they really mean is that you give the value of an eye, that you pay financial damages. Just like tort law today, you don't go to court. If you've been hurt in an accident that was caused by somebody's negligence, you're not going to go in and demand that that person be killed or that his leg be broken or etc. You get financial damages. And that's what the rabbis understood an eye for an eye means from the earliest time. And in fact, our tradition says that goes all the way back to when the Torah was given at Sinai. As soon as the Torah was given and written an eye for an eye, God told Moses that this would mean that financial damages are awarded. But then the question is, and for this I credit Rabbi David Block, who's writing about it for our Table for Five this week, and so you'll see this a little later this week in the Table for Five. So the question Rabbi Block asks is, well, if it from the earliest time it meant an eye for an eye means that we award financial damages, why does it say an eye for an eye? Why didn't it say that when somebody is damaged due to somebody's intentional or negligent action or even accidental action, that why doesn't it say that damages are awarded, financial damages or some kind of property damages? Why does it say an eye for an eye? And Rabbi Block gives this wonderful answer that the Torah was written in this language because God is teaching us a very important lesson. And that is this: perhaps financial damages are going to be awarded. Perhaps the court is going to have to set some kind of a value on what a person's eye is worth, or what his loss of an ability to do work, or his loss of an ability to direct movies or paint paintings or be a writer, or who knows. We're not only talking about the loss of eyes here, right? So financial damages are going to be awarded. But for the person who's receiving these damages, who God forbid lost an eye, or God forbid lost his vision, lost two eyes, or God forbid lost something else, the money's never going to make him whole. You're not going to award some kind of infinite damages. The courts have to put a limit on these things so that a society can function. The person who's paying the damages didn't probably mean to put someone's eye out, and their life isn't going to be taken away from them, nor their future. Nevertheless, even though the damages have to be awarded and a value needs to be put on it so that an amount of damages can be specified by the judge, we all need to acknowledge that for the one who lost an eye, he's never going to be whole. He lost an eye. And the Torah is written this way to teach us how important it is to empathize with the person who has lost the eye or the tooth, etc. We may award damages. We may have to go on as a society, right? In this year of the pandemic, tough decisions have to be made. Eventually, the society has to get started again. Businesses have to open, etc. Decisions have to be made. Life has to go on. And it's much easier for life to go on for the people, who are not personally devastated by the plague or by the loss of an eye or whatever the injury or the wound or the terrible event is. But for the one who experiences that event, the one who dies or their family members, the survivors, etc., life will never be the same. And to them, the Torah is teaching us, think about what it means. Maybe they got the value of an eye, but that person lost an eye. And we should try to put ourselves in their place and think about what that means and be there with them and be there for them. It's to sensitize us to the other people's loss that the Torah says an eye for an eye. All right. Let's get to our page today. Again, I apologize if you're joining us late. Had some pretty severe technical difficulties trying to get online. Had to use an alternate method to get online. I don't even know if we're getting onto YouTube today. And I'm really praying that by tomorrow these tech difficulties are fixed, because I don't know what caused them. That's the worst feeling. Okay. All right, let's get to it. So we're, like I said, page 79, Ayin Test, here in Tractate Pesachim, the fourth volume of the Talmud, where the laws of Passover. We're in the second half discussing the Korban Pesach, bringing the Passover offering. We're in chapter 7 now, discussing the fifth Mishna. Here's the Mishnah, very short, and it's actually a concept that we've now mentioned a bunch of times, and now we're actually finally getting to the Mishnah, which states it. Mishnah number 5 in chapter 7. If the entire community, or most of it, became tamei, ritually impure, or the priests were all tamei, and the community was tahor, the community was pure, ritually pure, so they should perform the ritual of the Paschal Lamb in ritual impurity. So this is what we've seen before. Right, so you are not allowed to bring the Passover offering. We only bring it when the temple is standing. When the temple is standing, a person who is ritually impure, a person who's tamei, perhaps he helped bury a dead body, so he became tamei. So he's disqualified from eating the Passover lamb. Or if the lamb itself became tamei, either the animal became tamei or the meat became tamei after it was slaughtered. So then we can't bring the offering. But if the majority of the Jewish people are in that condition, or as we see here, even if the people are tahor, the people are ritually pure, if the priests who have to be involved in bringing an offering, if all of them are impure, something happened, there was some kind of incident at the temple and it affected all the priests and they are all tamei, so there is no priest who can, in a state of purity, receive the blood. The offering does not have to be slaughtered by a priest. That can be done by Yisrael, a regular Israelite. But it has to be a priest who receives the blood, carries it to the altar, and sprinkles it on the altar. And a priest can't do that if he is tamei, in a state of ritual impurity. But if all of them are ritually impure, then we proceed as if all were pure. That's what this Mishnah is telling us. If a minority of the community became impure, even if they are many people, maybe thousands and thousands of people became tamei, but if they are not more than half the Jewish people, then those people are disqualified from bringing the Passover offering. They'll have another chance in Pesach Sheni, the second Passover, 1 month later, which God gave for that reason, people who were tamei at the time of the first Passover, or if they were too far away and couldn't get to Jerusalem. So if a minority of the community became impure, even if they are many people, those who are pure, those who are tahor, perform the ritual of the Paschal Lamb on the first Pesach, and those who are impure perform the ritual on the second Pesach. That's the Mishnah. Now we go to the Gemara. The sages taught, if most or all of the Jewish people were impure, and the priests and sacred vessels used in the temple service were pure, or conversely, if the Jewish people were pure and the priests and sacred vessels were impure, and even in a situation in which the Jewish people and the priests were pure, but the sacred vessels were impure, they may perform any part of the ritual of the Paschal Lamb in ritual impurity. So interesting. Now, in the Mishnah, we said, okay, if the majority of the Jewish people are tamei, then we still go forward. If all of the priests are tamei, then we still go forward with the Paschal Lamb. And now this first clause of the Gemara adds, if all of the vessels, right? So the vessels, for instance, that are used to receive the blood of the Passover offering in the temple, when the temple is standing, hasn't in 2,000 years, but when it was standing, when we could do this ritual, if all of the vessels were impure, then we would still proceed. We wouldn't cancel the first Passover, as it were. But by the correlation of this, what the implication of this is that if one of the vessels was pure and all the others were impure, so then we wouldn't use those impure vessels. It would just be a very slow afternoon on Erev Pesach as we try to get through all those lambs just using the one vessel. The reason for this, says the Gemara, is that a communal offering, which is sacrificed even in a state of tuma, of ritual impurity, is not divided. Therefore, since some of the service must be performed in a state of ritual impurity, it may all be performed in a state of ritual impurity. So you wouldn't say that, well, the people are pure, the vessels are impure, so we'll just skip the part where the vessels are used. No, you have to do the whole procedure. And if there's no way to do the procedure except to encounter impurity because either the majority of the people or all of the priests or all of the vessels, then we go forward because it's a communal offering. For individual offerings, no. For an individual offering, if the person or the sacrifice becomes tamei, that offering would have to be postponed to another time. Rav Chisda said, they taught that the service may be done in a state of ritual impurity if the sacred vessels are impure, only in a case where the knife to be used for slaughtering became impure through contact with one who was ritually impure due to contact with the corpse, as the merciful one states. So I just mentioned the vessels used to receive the blood, so it seems like I was wrong, right? At least according to Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda is saying, and we're going to go to the halacha in a moment. In fact, I'm going to do that now before I go forward. So the halacha is a paschal lamb that is sacrificed in a state of impurity because the sacred vessels are impure may be eaten only by impure people. This is the halacha if the knives used to slaughter the offering became impure through contact with a corpse. However, if the knives became impure through contact with a creeping animal, only people who are pure may eat the paschal lamb. The halacha was ruled in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Chisda because Rabbi Yitzchak agrees with his opinion. So this is the law as Rav Chisda states it. So they taught that the service may be done in a state of ritual impurity if the sacred vessels are impure, only in a case where the knife that is going to be used for slaughtering the lamb or the goat, the young goat, became impure through contact with one who was ritually impure due to contact with a corpse. As the merciful one states, this is from Numbers 19:16, and whoever shall touch on the open field one slain with a sword, or one that died, or the bone of a man, or a grave, shall be impure for 7 days. So this is where the Torah defines what tuma of a corpse is, right? That if you touch a dead body or a piece of a dead body, it's a very strong kind of tuma. A person who touches this is going to be impure for 7 days. They need to be sprinkled with this mixture of water with the ashes of the red heifer on the 3rd and 7th day. And then there's some other requirements as well. But why is this important? The sages expounded, a sword is like a corpse. So therefore, a sword or another metal implement that touches a corpse attains the same level of impurity as the corpse itself, which is the ultimate primary source of ritual impurity. Similarly, a knife that touches a person, who is a primary source of ritual impurity due to contact with a corpse, attains the same status. So we're going to distinguish here metal objects from other kinds of objects in terms of their ability to receive and transmit ritual impurity. Therefore, it renders impure the person who uses it for slaughtering. In this case, when the ritual of the Paschal Lamb is initially performed, it is performed in a state of ritual impurity of the body. Generally, one who is impure in this way is liable to receive charis, excision, right, death at the hands of the heavenly court, if he eats sacrificial meat or enters the temple. However, if the knife became ritually impure with the impurity of a creeping animal, which renders the meat impure but does not render the person impure, so it's a lesser degree of tuma than a human corpse, because something rendered impure by a primary source of ritual impurity becomes a secondary source of ritual impurity, which can render food impure, but not people. So those who are pure may perform the ritual of the Paschal Lamb, but those who are impure may not perform the ritual. This is because it is preferable that one eat the Paschal Lamb with impurity of the meat, as the nature of its prohibition is that of a regular negative commandment. And one should not eat the meat with impurity of the body, which renders one liable to receive charis. So here we're distinguishing between the kind of impurity that would be involved in this procedure of bringing the Paschal Lamb. On the one hand, if the meat became impure. On the other hand, if a person who's supposed to be eating it became impure. Both are prohibited. But when we're talking about a situation where the majority is impure and we're going to bring it anyway, so then the question becomes, are we going to distinguish between these kinds of impurity? We're going to bring the lamb. Are we going to eat it? The answer is yes, we're going to bring it. We're going to slaughter it. We're going to eat it. But are we going to distinguish between one kind of impurity and another? It appears that we are. However, if the knife became ritually impure with the impurity of a creeping animal. Wait, I just said that, right? Receive card. Okay. The Gemara comments on Rav Chisda's attempt to distinguish between many types of impurity and to claim that the entire community sacrifices the Paschal Lamb in a state of ritual impurity only when the people have become impure with a severe form of impurity. So apparently Rav Chisda holds that impurity is overridden, right, that we override Tuma in cases involving the public. The prohibition of sacrificing offerings in a state of impurity is not wholly permitted for a community. It's not that any kind of impurity that the majority of the community has, we're going to override the normal prohibition on bringing the Paschal Lamb when people are impure. We're not going to do that no matter what kind of impurity it is. At least according to Rav Chisda, we're going to make a distinction. We're going to make a distinction. The prohibition of sacrificing offerings in a state of impurity is not wholly permitted for a community. Rather, it is overridden in cases of great need. Therefore, whenever it is possible to minimize the severity of the impurity, it is necessary to do so. And so, too, Rabbi Yitzchak said explicitly, impurity is overridden in cases involving the public. And Rava said that whenever there is a form of ritual impurity involved in the service, even those who are ritually impure may also perform the ritual of the Paschal Lamb. What is the reason for this? As it is written, and the flesh that touches any impure thing shall not be eaten. It shall be burned in fire, and the flesh, everyone that is pure, may eat the flesh. So Rava derives from this verse that anywhere that we do not apply the law that the flesh that touches any impure thing shall not be eaten. So if the meat becomes tamei because it touched an impure thing, so the meat may be eaten despite being impure, we also do not apply, and the flesh, everyone that is pure, may eat the flesh. In that case, the meat may be eaten even by one who is impure, right? So we're distinguishing between the meat becoming impure and the people becoming impure. And what we seem to be saying is, well, if the meat became impure, and normally we would not eat it, but it's because the majority, I guess, of the Passover offerings have become impure. The majority of the people all of the priests are impure. So even though they will render the meat impure when they touch it, we're going to still allow the procedure to go forward because all of the priests are impure. And in that situation, we're also going to allow regular people outside the temple who are impure and who normally would not be allowed to eat the Paschal offering. They will be allowed, even though the community, override of the Tumah prohibitions was not because the majority of the people are impure. It was because the priests are impure and they rendered the meat impure. But now this person who is impure and would have had to wait for second Passover, it's like he got lucky because the priests are all impure. He's going to be allowed to participate and eat according to this ruling. Just as the first half of the verse is not applicable, the second half is also not applicable. It is only anywhere that we apply the law that the flesh that touches any impure thing shall not be eaten, that we also apply the second half of the verse, and the flesh, everyone that is pure may eat the flesh. Therefore, when the offering is sacrificed in a state of tumah, there is no prohibition on tamei people to eat it. I'm almost done, so if you have questions and comments, get them in now. It was stated that the Amoraim, the rabbis of the Gemara, the rabbis of the Talmudic period, disagreed with regard to the Mishna's statement that the Paschal lamb may be sacrificed in a state of impurity if the majority of the public is impure. That we've been taken as a given. What do you mean they disagree? What are they disagreeing on? It's actually one subtle nuance of this. What is it that the rabbis of the Gemara disagree on? It is a case where the Jewish people were divided and exactly half were pure and exactly half were impure. So we can't say that the majority of the Jewish people are tamei. They're exactly half and half. This is a very Talmudic type of question, right? So, okay, we got the principle. The majority of the Jewish people are tamei. Then normally when we don't allow people to participate in the Paschal offering, obviously when the temple is standing, we would allow them to because the majority of the Jewish people are tamei. And when it's a minority of the people, then even if there's large numbers of them, huge numbers, thousands of them, and they're all tamei, we're going to say, sorry, the majority of the Jewish people are not tamei, they're tahor, so those who are tamei are going to have to wait until Pesach Sheni, the second Passover, a month from now. But the Talmudic question is, well, what happens if the entire Jewish population is exactly divided half and half? Half are ritually pure and half are ritually impure. Then what do we do? Rav said, half and half is like the majority. And Rav Kahana said, half and half is not like the majority. The Gemara explains a dispute between Rav and Rav Kahana. Rav said, half and half is like the majority, meaning that if each of the two groups has the status of the majority of the public. Therefore, those who are pure perform the ritual of the Paschal lamb for themselves in a state of ritual purity. And those who are impure perform the ritual of the Paschal lamb for themselves in a state of ritual impurity. They are also considered like the majority of the public, and the sacrifice of the majority of the public is not deferred until the second Passover. Right? So in this situation where you have it exactly half and half, you're going to allow it to be brought. But since half the people are tahor, in a state of purity, what we're going to do then is we're going to say, okay, it can be, everyone can bring it, but we're going to separate the two groups because there's no reason to let the tumah of the half that is tamei kind of cross over to the half that's tahor. So the half that's tahor, they bring the Passover lamb, they do their own thing. The other half is going to be allowed to bring it because it's like the majority of the people, but they're going to do it in a sort of a second tier, second wave, as it were. And Rav Kahana said, half and half is not like the majority. Therefore, those who are pure perform the ritual of the Paschal lamb on Pesach, on the first Passover, and those who are impure are going to have to wait and perform the ritual of the Paschal lamb on the second Pesach, Pesach Sheni, a month later. And that is the law. The halacha says, if exactly half of the community is ritually pure and half is ritually impure, those who are pure sacrifice the Paschal lamb in a state of ritual purity, and those who are impure sacrifice it in a state of ritual impurity. I'm saying the law is like Rav, the first who stated it first. It's not like Rav Kahana. And the halakha is ruled in accordance with the opinion of Rav in his disputes with his student, Rav Kahana. All right, that's what I've got for us today. Let me see if we've got questions that Nina has been able to slip to me. Okay. With respect to covering the eyes for Shema, Sean Rothberg comments, right is for chesed, left is gevura, so we cover with our right hand. Beautiful. So Sean, that's a Kabbalistic teaching that Sean is sharing. And the idea here is, and actually this is also related to the idea of an eye for an eye. So, it says, of course, in the Bible, that we are formed in God's image, right? Now, God is an infinite being. We're inside God. God is not corporeal in any way. There's no way for us to understand the shape or dimension of the Lord. But somehow we're formed in the image of God. So what could that mean? So Kabbalistically, we have a tradition that the limbs of our body, the right arm, the right leg, the left leg, the extension in between, as it were, the head, that the part of the chest, that the parts of the body correspond in some way to God's self. In what way? To the attributes of God. And so what Sean is alluding to here is that we have this understanding that sort of God's grace, God's blessings flow into this world through 10 different channels called the Sephiros. And so the upper three are kind of the intellectual faculties, the Chochmah, Bina, and Da'as, essentially wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. And then the lower 7 are the ones that we relate to actually more on a day-to-day basis. And the most important of those are Chesed and Gevura, symbolized by the right hand and the left hand, or the right arm and the left arm. So the right hand, Chesed, is understood to be the giving energy of God. And the left hand, Gevura, is understood to be the restraining or judgmental energy of God. These have to be in balance, not just God is perfect, so God balances everything with ease. We have to work at balancing those forces. And you might think that, well, it's what we're really working on is not being so judgmental. Or actually, some people have to work on being kinder. But the fact is, you would think that the more kindness, the better. But no, you can actually overdo kindness, right? Sometimes people think that to benefit the world, they're just going to do whatever they think is right. And then they're not exercising good judgment. And so their chesed would be out of whack with their gevura. However, all things being even, we do prioritize the right hand over the left, meaning we prioritize chesed, loving kindness, just a hair's breadth over gevura, restraint or judgment. Right, so when everything is really equal, then we're going to give the benefit of the doubt to kindness. And so that's why the right hand is prioritized. It's also true that in the ancient world, people ate with their right hand because their left hand was used for other bodily functions. So the right hand, which was used for eating, was the hand that was kept clean. And so when you're doing anything holy, you would use the right hand. Then people could say, what about left-handed people? Generally speaking, in terms of Hesed and Gevura, that's just associated with the right hand and the left hand in that order. It is true that a left-handed man will put his tefillin on his right arm, whereas a right-handed man puts it on his left hand. So there are adjustments made for left-handed people. But in terms of Chesed and Gevura, Chesed is associated with the right side and Gevura with the left. And we do generally use the right hand to cover our eyes when we say Shema. Lucy says, an eye for an eye also, I think, tells us that we may never exact more damages than what was done to us. One needs to stop and think, not act in a revengeful manner. That's for sure. That's for sure. There was this book I read years ago by Jonathan Franzen called The Corrections. And there was a character in that book who was at all times compiling evidence. Right? This character was at all times thinking about, I believe it was a she, I think it was a mom. I don't remember the book very well. I just remember that there was one character who was always compiling evidence against other characters. In other words, listing over and over in that character's mind how they had been wronged by other people. That is, well, there's another saying that when we hold a grudge, we're giving people rent-free space in our heart and brain. Obviously, that is not a positive or fruitful way to live. So it happens to all of us that we've been wronged. It also happens to all of us that we make mistakes and wrong others from time to time. So just as we hope to be given the benefit of the doubt and judged favorably when we make those mistakes, we really have to endeavor to give other people the benefit of the doubt and understand that when they wronged us, they made a mistake. And then think about not only, how can I be made whole, but but how can the relationship be made whole even though one of us has hurt the other? Lucy also says, so what happened to the women about eating the Paschal lamb? Aren't women of childbearing age considered impure more than a week in every month? Yes. So, I don't have the answer at the tip of my fingers right here. But I do think that, so we have two competing issues here, right? One would be, this is definitely a time-bound positive mitzvah to eat the Paschal lamb. It has to be done in its time, and women are excused from having to fulfill time-bound positive mitzvahs. Doesn't mean that they can't do it, but they don't have to do it, right? They're not obligated in the same way. So if a woman was tamei on Passover, it would appear that she could not eat the Passover lamb unless, right, as we just saw, if the majority of the Jewish people were tamei, then she's going to be able to participate even if her source of tuma is different than the majority of the people's. That seems to be indicated, at least by what we've read so far in our daf. And finally, Yosef Shum says, what if somebody is not ritually unclean, but had sinned within the 24-hour period? Does their sin render them impure? And the answer is no. It's very important to remember this, and it keeps coming up. We have to keep reminding ourselves because, when we hear unclean, we tend to associate that with a behavior and possibly even a judgment about them. But ritual impurity does not adhere to a person because they've sinned. It is not connected to sin. Ritual impurity comes to a person because they've come into contact with a source of ritual impurity. So that could be, in fact, think about it. If you bury a dead body that was found and no one else was taking care of it, that's the ultimate mitzvah. That's the ultimate good deed. You've done such a good deed, such a positive good. It renders you tamei. So you're going to have to go through a purification procedure, but it has nothing to do with sin. You don't become tamei because of a sin that you've committed. You become tamei because you've come into contact with a source of tuma. Sometimes it's a source outside yourself. Sometimes it's from yourself. If there's some kind of a bodily emission, a liquid emission from your body. Some certain liquid emissions from the body can cause a person to become tamei, and then they have to go through a purification procedure. Now remember, again, this only applies at the time that the temple is standing, and the main reason that we're careful about tuma in those situations is so that you can enter the temple, which is the holiest of spaces, and we are prohibited to enter the temple if we're in a state of tuma. And tuma is something you can't see on a person. You can't tell if they're tamei. Right, a person who has tzara'as might have a skin outbreak. That's just one kind of tuma that might be visible. It might not. It might be under their clothes. But most sources of tuma, you can't tell that a person is tamei. So it's really about taking incredible care with ourselves to not come into contact. What it would mean is to protect yourself from becoming tamei. You're going to have to be so mindful of keeping yourself in this state of ritual purity because you're going to be entering the temple. And in that sense, there is definitely a lesson for us, right? This idea of mindfulness and preparing for a contact with holiness. And these days, we're all assumed to be tamei. We're all tamei. Right? We don't even know where the sources of tuma are in the world. We don't know where all the bodies are buried in the world. We've probably walked over a grave without knowing it and become tamei and never gone through a purification ritual. We are all tamei in this world. When the Messiah comes, then these laws are going to kick back in again when the third temple is rebuilt. However, when we're going to say the Shema in the morning or in the evening or at the bedtime Shema, when we're going to pray any kind of a prayer, or when we're going to say a grace after meals. So there we're putting ourselves in much closer proximity to holiness. We're engaging in a holy practice. And we want to have a little bit of that mindset of, okay, I'm about to do a holy thing. I'm not just going to race into it, get it done, fulfill my obligation, and move on. just like I would guard myself before I enter the precincts of the Holy Temple, I want to kind of guard myself before I pray. In other words, I want to acquire a mindset of holiness before I engage in a holy practice. And that may be a kind of modern application of the principles of Tuma, as it were, that we could bring into our lives today. And finally, I see Heather Dyke says, when is the Messiah going to come? We pray it's today, but we don't know. We don't know when the Messiah is going to come. But the 12th principle of Rambam's 13 principles of the Jewish faith is, I believe, with a complete and perfect faith in the coming of the Messiah. And though the Messiah may tarry, and it's been a long time that we've been waiting, nevertheless, I long for the Messiah every day. So we don't know when it's going to happen. All we know is we have a tradition that at least one day before the Messiah comes, the prophet Elijah, Eliyahu Hanavi, will come and let us know that the Messiah is coming. And the prophet will not come on a Friday to tell us that the Messiah is coming the next day, so that he doesn't interfere with our preparations for Shabbos on any regular Shabbos. That's all we know. Some would say, like my good dear friend Rabbi Reuven Wolf, that if you look out in the world these days, there are many prophecies about what the late days before the Messiah comes will look like, that are can be seen in the world today. But does that mean that we're very close now, we're a day away, or we're very close now, we're only a century away? We don't know. We just pray that Mashiach will come as soon as possible, and end war and sickness and bloodshed and all these terrible things that are in the world today, so that we can enter a new age of peace and harmony. That's what I've got for us today. With God's help, our technical difficulties will be gone tomorrow, and we can proceed as we normally do. All the best, my holy sisters and brothers.